I never knew my grandmother well. She was a strange, cold woman, a distant figure that my parents rarely spoke about. When they did, their voices were always laced with hushed discomfort, as though speaking of her might somehow summon her presence. Her name was Evelyn Carver, and she lived alone in Hollow Grove, a sprawling estate in the middle of nowhere. I had only been there once when I was a child, a brief summer visit that left little impression beyond a vague memory of heavy drapes and a lingering sense of unease. We lost contact over the years. My parents died in a car accident when I was in my 20s, and after that, I never bothered to reach out to her. She seemed perfectly fine with the distance. So, when I received the letter from a lawyer informing me that my grandmother had died and left me her estate, I was shocked. Why would she leave it to me? I muttered aloud as I stared at the letter, sitting at the kitchen table. My husband, Mark, glanced at me over his coffee mug. She probably didn't have anyone else, he said with a shrug. Our 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was sitting on the floor, coloring in one of her many sketchbooks. She glanced up at the mention of a new house, her eyes lighting with innocent excitement. "Can we live there, Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with the kind of naive enthusiasm only children have. I smiled faintly and brushed a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "We'll see, sweetheart." Mark arched an eyebrow, studying me. "You're not seriously considering moving there, are you?" I sighed. The truth was, we were drowning in debt. Between Mark's layoff last year and the piling medical bills from Lily's asthma treatments, we were barely holding on. We were months behind on our mortgage. Moving into a fully paid estate seemed like a gift we couldn't refuse. "It's a fresh start," I said softly, though I felt a strange unease gnawing at the back of my mind. By the following week, we had packed up everything we owned and were driving out to Hollow Grove. The first time I saw the house again as an adult, it took my breath away. It was massive, a 3-story stone mansion with dark grey shingles and looming Gothic architecture. The windows were tall and narrow, like unblinking eyes, and the black iron gates creaked eerily in the wind. As we drove up the winding gravel path, Lily squealed with excitement from the back seat. "Look at the big house, Mommy." Mark didn't share her enthusiasm. He parked the car and shut off the engine, staring at the hulking structure with furrowed brows. "Charming," he muttered. I smiled faintly, trying to ease the tension in my chest. "It's old, that's all." But when I stepped out of the car and stared at Hollow Grove, a faint chill ran down my spine. The house seemed to breathe. The windows looked clouded and hollow, and the once vibrant gardens were now overgrown and tangled with thorny weeds. The front door, a heavy, black oak slab with iron studs, creaked open slightly in the wind, as though it had been expecting us. When we crossed the threshold, the smell of decay hit me. It wasn't overpowering, just faint enough to unsettle me. A strange mix of stale air, mildew, and something faintly coppery. We explored the house together, wandering through the dust-laden hallways and faded drawing rooms. The furniture was antique, heavy with dark wood and moth-eaten upholstery. Long curtains hung from the windows, their fabric yellowed with age. Lily twirled around in the large foyer, her giggles echoing eerily through the empty house. "It's like a castle," she declared. Mark gave me a weary glance. "Castle of nightmares, maybe," he muttered. But I ignored him. Because despite the creaking floors and the faint drafts, the house was ours now. And I was determined to make it a home. The first few nights were uneventful. We unpacked slowly, cleaning each room as we went. The 3 of us slept in the same bedroom while we fixed up the rest of the house. But then, the noises began. At first, it was subtle. I'd be lying in bed, half asleep, when I'd hear faint tapping. A slow, deliberate pattern like fingernails against the wall. Tap, tap, tap. I would sit up, holding my breath. But the sound would stop as soon as I was fully awake. The next night, I woke to the sound of footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps on the 2nd floor. But when I crept upstairs, flashlight trembling in my grip, there was nothing there. Still, I convinced myself it was just the house settling. Old homes make noise. Andrea. Stop imagining things. But then Lily started talking to someone who wasn't there. One morning, I found her sitting in the corner of her room, chatting softly. Her tiny hands were moving as though she was playing an invisible game of catch. I crouched beside her, forcing a smile. "Who are you talking to, baby?" She turned to me with wide, innocent eyes. "The lady in the white dress, Mommy." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What lady, sweetheart?" Lily smiled sweetly. "She lives in the walls." I felt my breath hitch in my throat. That night, I lay awake, holding Mark's hand, listening. And that's when I heard it. A woman's voice. Soft. Muffled. Barely more than a whisper. It came from inside the walls. The weeks that followed were a descent into madness. The house no longer tried to be subtle. It didn't whisper in the dark or tap gently against the walls. It screamed, it pounded, and it tormented us relentlessly. I could no longer tell when I was awake or dreaming. The boundaries between reality and nightmare had dissolved entirely. Every night, the house came alive with malevolent energy. The footsteps that once creaked lightly overhead were now heavy and violent, stomping through the hallways as though something massive were charging through the house, desperate to find us. I would wake up to the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor, only to find the rooms in pristine order come morning. Mark and I began sleeping with the lights on, but the light didn't keep the shadows at bay. One night, I woke to the sensation of cold fingers brushing against my face. My eyes snapped open, but there was nothing there, just the dim glow of the bedside lamp and the heavy silence of the room. I exhaled sharply, trying to calm my racing heart. But then I felt it again. Fingers. Slowly, deliberately, dragging across my cheek. I bolted upright, shoving the covers aside. My hands trembled as I clicked on the flashlight app on my phone, sweeping the room in shaky arcs. Nothing. And then I looked at the closet door. It was slightly ajar. I could have sworn we had locked it. With my hands shaking, I slowly walked over and gripped the edge of the door. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just empty hangers and Mark's clothes. I let out a shaky sigh and turned around. And that's when I saw it. A pale hand, reaching out from under the bed. I screamed, stumbling backward, but when Mark switched on the light, the hand was gone. I stared at the bed, breathless, but there was nothing there. "Jesus, Andrea," Mark groaned, sitting up with a frustrated sigh. "You're seeing things again." But I knew what I had seen. And the house knew it too. The next night, I found Lily standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., facing the wall. Her tiny hands were pressed against the wallpaper, her fingers twitching slightly. Her blonde hair fell in tangled waves over her face, making her expressionless features look almost inhuman in the dim light. I called her name softly. "Lily, sweetheart." She didn't respond. She just stood there, perfectly still. When I approached her, I saw her fingernails were bleeding. She had been scratching at the wall. "Baby, stop," I gasped, pulling her away. Her hands were trembling violently, her nails cracked and splintered. But she didn't cry. She just turned her head slightly and smiled. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "She's in there, Mommy." My stomach twisted. "Who, baby?" Lily tilted her head, her smile growing wider. "The lady in the white dress." By the end of the week, the house reeked of rot. No matter how much I cleaned, no matter how many windows I opened, the foul stench of decay clung to the very walls. It was thick and coppery, like spoiled meat, and it made me gag whenever I walked into certain rooms. The odor was strongest in the upstairs hallway, just outside Lily's room. When I pressed my hand to the wallpaper, it felt damp and spongy. My fingers came away sticky with a thin, reddish-brown residue. That's when I knew I was no longer imagining things. There was something hidden in the walls. By the time I finally made the decision to tear into the walls, I was desperate. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I could barely function. Mark, still skeptical, refused to believe me. "This is insane, Andrea," he snapped when I grabbed a hammer and began smashing into the plaster of the upstairs hallway. "You've lost it." But I didn't care. I was driven by a deep, unshakable certainty the house was hiding something awful. With trembling hands, I swung the hammer into the wall, plaster shattering in jagged bursts. My arms ached, my palms burned with blisters, but I didn't stop. Mark yelled at me to stop, but I ignored him. I kept going, hacking deeper and deeper into the rotted wood and splintered beams. And then, the stench hit me like a wall of putrid heat. I gagged violently, dropping the hammer. The hole I had made revealed a narrow cavity between the walls. My flashlight beam flickered inside, and for a moment, I thought it was empty. But then I saw it. The skeleton. Curled into a fetal position, its bony arms wrapped protectively around a smaller skeleton. I stared in frozen horror. The larger skeleton still wore the remnants of a tattered white dress, now yellowed with age. The smaller one had the remains of a bonnet still clinging to its tiny, fractured skull. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. And then I understood. My grandmother had killed her daughter and grandchild. And she hid them in the walls. I stumbled back, gasping. My hands were trembling violently. My legs felt weak, barely able to hold me up. Mark was staring at the grisly scene, his face pale and slack-jawed. "Oh my God," he whispered. "We should have run. We should have packed up and left the house immediately." But it was already too late. Because the house wasn't done with us yet. That night, the house made its final move. The doors locked on their own, the windows slammed shut, and the fireplace roared to life without warning. We were trapped. The hallways stretched longer and darker, the rooms shifted unnaturally. It was as though the house itself was bending reality, distorting it into a maze of madness. Mark and I clung to Lily, stumbling through the dark, trying to find a way out. But the house was alive now. It breathed, and its voice filled the walls. As we ran, we heard Evelyn's voice whispering all around us. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" But the house wouldn't let us go. Not without a fight. As we ran down the hallway, the floorboards cracked beneath our feet. My breath caught in my throat as the rotting wood gave way, and Mark's foot slipped into a gaping hole. He cried out, clutching Lily tightly as he struggled to keep from falling through. "Run!" he shouted. "Go!" But I didn't leave him. I grabbed his hand with both of mine and pulled with every ounce of strength I had. Somehow, we made it to the front door. I slammed my shoulder into the wood, screaming hoarsely as Mark yanked it open. We burst outside into the cold night, gasping for air. I clutched Lily so tightly I thought I might crush her. The house stood silently behind us, dark and brooding, as though nothing had happened. We never went back. We left everything behind. The furniture, the clothes, the memories. I never set foot in Hollow Grove again. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, swearing I can still hear her voice. Soft. Whispering.